No one remembered why the shutters closed at dusk. It had been that way for generations. In the quiet town of Ashbrook Hollow, nestled deep in the Massachusetts woods, the sun's descent was the signal. By the time twilight brushed the horizon, every door was bolted, every curtain drawn, every light dimmed. The town slept behind walls of superstition and silence, except for the Whitemoor house. Perched atop a hill like a watchful crow, the manor loomed above the town, its windows unshuttered, its lanterns lit. No one spoke of it aloud, but everyone knew the Whitemoors kept their eyes open when others dared not, and they never told why. Eleanor Whitemoor was 19 and had never missed a night at the attic window. Her father had raised her with an unwavering rule. When the stars appeared, she must climb the narrow steps, light the blue lantern, and watch. Nothing more. No questions. No blinking. And so she watched. Fog crept in from the woods like a whispering tide. The wind carried a scent of wet pine and something colder, metallic, ancient. In the darkness beyond the fields, she could see the faint outlines of barns, the rusted fence posts, the gnarled shapes of trees twisted by decades of harsh winters. Nothing moved, but she stared still. Every night she wondered why. She'd asked her father once when she was 7. He had simply said, "Because if we don't, they will." She didn't ask again. Tonight, like so many before, she rested her hands on the cold wooden sill and peered through the antique glass. Her breath left a thin mist on the pane, but she didn't wipe it away. The rules forbade movement. You watched with stillness. You waited. From the hill she could see the entire town, small and sleeping. The glow of kerosene lamps leaked through the slits in curtains, casting faint yellow lines on porches. Dogs never barked at night. Birds never sang after sundown. Even the wind, it seemed, tiptoed past Ashbrook Hollow. There was only silence. And her. If stories like this grip your soul, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the ones that stay buried. Some truths are meant to be remembered, others simply endured. A sudden twitch in the corner of her vision made her inhale sharply. A trick of the eye, a shifting branch. She didn't turn her head, only her eyes moved. Along the edge of the Whitemoor orchard, something passed between the trees. No form, just absence, like a blot of ink sliding across a canvas. Eleanor's heart skipped. She reached instinctively for the string of the lantern and gave it a gentle tug. The flame flared once, blue and steady. That was the signal. That had always been the signal. For whom or what, she did not know. She waited. Minutes stretched. Her knees ached from standing. Her fingers turned numb against the sill. But she did not move. Not until the blot vanished, melting into the deeper dark like salt into water. Then, only then, did she breathe. She descended the steps in silence, her lantern in hand, feet careful not to creak the old wood. At the bottom of the attic stair, her father waited. "Anything?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just a flicker." Samuel Whitemoor placed a hand on her shoulder, heavy as iron. His face was stone. "Then we did our part." She nodded. He turned away without another word. Back in her room, Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed, the flame of the lantern now pale orange. Her mind raced with thoughts she had no name for. And outside, far past the orchard, something watched back. But no one else looked. No one else ever did. Only the Whitemoors. And no one remembered why. The Whitemoor house had no mirrors. That was the first thing visitors noticed, though few ever crossed its threshold. No silvered glass, no reflections, only old portraits with cracked varnish and eyes that never seemed to blink. The walls bore the scent of cedar and candle wax, the ceilings low and heavy, the wood worn smooth by time and habit. It was a place that whispered, even in silence. Eleanor moved through it like a shadow, barefoot, her steps soft as breath. The house had raised her as much as her father had. Its corners, its creaks, its shifting light in late afternoon. All familiar, all sacred. The library smelled of dust and ancient ink. The dining room had a table long enough for 10, though only 2 ever sat. And in every room, clocks. Grandfather clocks, mantel clocks, travel clocks in velvet-lined boxes, all ticking in unison, marking the hours of watch and rest. The attic was the heart of the house, not in warmth, but in function. It was the place of duty. Its narrow stairs curved like a spine, leading to the high triangular chamber where a single tall window stared into the dark. That window had not been opened in nearly 50 years. Its latch rusted shut, its curtains never drawn. The blue lantern lived there, always fueled, always ready. Eleanor had grown up learning its rituals. Every evening, after supper, she cleaned the lantern glass, trimmed the wick, and placed it on the sill. She was taught how to breathe evenly, how to keep her eyes focused on the horizon. Never follow a sound, never blink too long, and never, ever, look down at the orchard if the wind shifted. Sometimes, when she was little, she had imagined the house as a creature, alive, watching, breathing, the groans of its beams, the steady thump of the grandfather clock in the hall, its pulse. Now at 19 she no longer played those games, but sometimes the thought still returned, unbidden. On this night she lingered by the parlor before heading up. The fireplace was cold. A half-knitted shawl lay draped over the arm of a chair. It belonged to her mother, who had passed when Eleanor was 10. Samuel never spoke of her. The parlor still smelled faintly of the rosewater she'd worn, as if the house refused to let her go. Climbing the attic steps, lantern in hand, Eleanor felt the weight of the silence. It wasn't loneliness, it was vigilance. This was what it meant to be a Whitemoor, to carry what others could not, to see what others dared not. Outside, the orchard was barely visible through the mist. The moon hung low, swollen and yellow, half veiled by drifting clouds. No wind tonight. Just the stillness that pressed against the glass like a held breath. She stood at the window for an hour, maybe more. Time in that room was different. The ticking of the clocks grew faint. The dark beyond the orchard shifted subtly, as if it watched her in return. And then movement, not in the orchard, inside. A reflection in the lantern's glass, a pale shimmer, fleeting. She turned quickly. Nothing. Only the door ajar behind her, the stairwell dark and empty. Her skin prickled. Downstairs, the clock struck 11. Eleanor took the lantern and descended, slower this time. At the base of the stairs, Samuel waited, as always. "Still clear," she said. He nodded. "Good." He didn't ask about the shimmer, and she didn't mention it. That, too, was part of the unspoken code. She went to bed that night with her window open a crack, just enough to hear the trees, just enough to remember that the world outside never truly slept, and in the deep hours of the night, when the house had gone silent and the clocks seemed to breathe rather than tick, Eleanor dreamed of someone standing in the orchard, still as a statue, eyes turned upward, watching her window from below. She didn't wake screaming, but she didn't forget. The arrival of Isaac Wren disrupted the hush that had hung over Ashbrook Hollow like a mourning veil. He stepped off the rust-bitten train with a leather satchel and a curious glint in his eye. An outsider, clearly, but not the kind that came looking for land or labor. He came with questions. And in Ashbrook Hollow, questions were the first sign of trouble. He was tall, lean, and carried himself like a man used to pushing against silence. A writer, he claimed, a researcher of American folklore, collecting oral histories and vanishing superstitions. The locals offered him stiff smiles and empty answers. They didn't care much for visitors, especially ones who asked about the nights. But Isaac Wren had read something, a clipped newspaper scrap from 1894, found in a university archive, which spoke of a town where every house closed its eyes at dusk, save one. That was enough to draw him there. That, and the name, Whitemoor. The librarian, an old woman with clouded eyes, offered him directions in a whisper. They still live there, father and daughter. Careful with that house, son. It remembers more than it tells. Eleanor first saw him from the orchard's edge, the one place she was never supposed to wander during the day. He stood at the gate, looking up at the house as if trying to read it like a book. She watched him from behind a tree, breath shallow, unsure whether to approach or retreat. He noticed her before she could choose. "You live there?" he asked, not unkindly. She nodded, stepping out from the shadows. "I'm Isaac Wren," he said. "I study stories, strange ones." "This isn't a place for stories," she replied. He smiled. "Then it's exactly where I need to be." They spoke for only minutes, but something shifted in those few breaths. Eleanor was used to silence. Isaac was full of words, full of reasons to break them. He spoke of towns that whispered of curses, of families marked by old deals, of eyes that watched through the woods. He asked if she'd heard such things. She said no. But her eyes didn't agree. That night she told her father about him. Samuel's reaction was immediate and cold. He's to be avoided. Outsiders carry questions like knives. "He's not dangerous," Eleanor said, though she wasn't sure why she defended him. "All questions are dangerous here," Samuel muttered, more to himself than to her. "They stir what should sleep." The next day, Isaac returned, not to the house but to the edges of town, asking about the nights, about the Whitemoors, about why the curtains closed so early. He got little in return. A woman crossed herself when he mentioned the attic. A boy spat at his boots. A man pointed toward the hills and told him to keep walking. Still he pressed on. Eleanor saw him again by the well near the church. He looked tired, frustrated, but not defeated. "They won't tell me anything," he said. "They can't," she replied. "Or they've forgotten how." He studied her, his gaze sharp yet gentle. "But you remember something." She shook her head, but again her eyes betrayed her. "Why does your family leave the windows open?" he asked. "Why do you watch?" Eleanor felt a coldness bloom in her chest. "Because we have to." "Who told you that?" "My father." "And who told him?" She hesitated. A gust of wind stirred the trees. A low rustle moved through the branches, like a voice just out of earshot. Isaac's expression changed. Curiosity gave way to something more solemn. "What happens if no one watches?" Eleanor didn't answer. She turned and walked away. That night, as she climbed to the attic, her thoughts tangled around Isaac's questions. They were dangerous, yes, but they were also necessary. Like the lantern. Like the watching. Because if no one watched... She didn't finish the thought. She couldn't. The attic always smelled of oil and cedar, a scent Eleanor had come to associate with duty. That night, after Isaac's questions had wormed their way into her thoughts, she felt something shift. Not outside, but within. A trembling at the edge of certainty. She waited for her father to fall asleep, before slipping through the narrow hallway and into the study. Samuel Whitemoor kept everything locked. Drawers, cabinets, the large trunk beneath the desk. But Eleanor had learned over time which hinges creaked and which ones yielded with quiet pressure. Her fingers trembled as she turned the brass key she'd stolen years ago. Inside the trunk lay yellow documents, ledgers and letters sealed in wax, but tucked beneath them was something older, a diary. Leather-bound, cracked, its pages soft with age. The name etched into the cover chilled her. Abigail Whitemoor, 1863. She carried it to her room and lit a small lamp. The pages smelled of dust and violets. Abigail's handwriting was elegant, controlled, even as the words grew darker. July 3rd, 1863. The man came again, said we must choose, vision or death. My husband wept. I said yes before he could speak. Eleanor read on, heart pounding. Abigail spoke of voices from the woods, of shapes that passed through walls, of children who sleepwalked into the orchard and were never found. Then the deal. We look so others may sleep. We keep the light so the dark will not touch them. The watchers know our name, they remember. Another passage. It was not a curse, but a pact. They are not evil, only bound. As are we. If no Whitemoor keeps the vigil, the ground opens. The old hunger returns. Eleanor closed the book slowly, her hands cold. For the first time, the watching wasn't just ritual. It was history, an agreement written in fear and fire. She returned the book to its hiding place before dawn, heart still racing. She said nothing to Samuel over breakfast. He didn't ask why her eyes looked darker than usual. He only handed her the lantern without a word. That evening she went to the attic early. The window, as always, waited, Its glass bore faint fingerprints from generations. She pressed her hand to it, feeling the chill of the night outside. Then she saw it, a faint glow, low in the orchard. Not a lantern, not a torch, a cold bluish light, hovering. She didn't blink. It drifted slowly between the trees. The mist coiled around it like smoke. As it moved, Eleanor felt the tiniest pull behind her navel, as though her body remembered something she had never lived. She reached for the lantern string and gave it a sharp tug. The flame flared blue, bright, a signal. She didn't know if it would be seen or by whom, only that it was meant to be sent. As the light in the orchard faded, the air around the house grew heavier. Eleanor could feel it pressing against the windows, not with force but with presence, as if the very night leaned in to listen. And then in the silence a voice, not heard but felt. "You remember." She stood frozen, barely breathing. "You look." The feeling vanished as suddenly as it came. Downstairs, Samuel waited. She descended slowly, the lantern still glowing faintly blue. He said nothing, but when he took the lantern from her hands, he looked at her, truly looked, for the first time in months. "You found it, didn't you?" She didn't speak. He nodded once. "Then you know it's not about fear, it's about keeping the promise." She wanted to scream, to ask why, to demand more. But all she said was, "What happens if the promise is broken?" Samuel's eyes clouded. "You've seen the orchard," he whispered. "You tell me." Isaac Wren didn't believe in witches. Not really. But when the town's librarian whispered the name Mother Agatha, her voice had the weight of legend. People didn't speak of the old woman in casual tones. They glanced over their shoulders. They crossed themselves. They warned him not to go near the woods where she lived, which of course meant that he went. He found her cottage nestled in a hollow of pines, half swallowed by ivy and thyme. Smoke curled from the chimney, and wind chimes made of bones clinked softly in the breeze. She answered his knock without surprise, as if she'd been waiting. "You smell like the house on the hill," she said, blind eyes clouded but steady. "And something older." Isaac hesitated, then nodded. "I'm looking for answers." "No, you're looking for reasons to ignore the ones already given." She ushered him in with a hand thin as twigs. Inside, the air was thick with sage, ash, and something metallic beneath the scent. Dried herbs hung from every beam. On the mantel sat carved figures of beasts with no names. "I came about the Whitemoor family," he said. "They're not a family," she replied. "They're a lock," Isaac frowned. "A lock? Some things were meant to stay sealed. They were chosen to keep the lid shut, to keep it beneath." "What is it?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. She tilted her head. "The eyes beneath the soil, the ones who never left when the world changed, the ones who remember the first night." Isaac tried to write, but his hands trembled. "You're saying they're real?" Agatha smiled, her teeth yellow and few. "They are as real as forgetting, and forgetting is the most powerful magic of all." She stood, her movements surprisingly steady, and took a piece of charcoal from the hearth. On the floor she drew a symbol, a jagged spiral wrapped in a square. It pulsed with wrongness. "They taught us to fear the night, but not the reason." The Whitemoors remember. That's their sin. And their duty. Isaac studied the sigil. "Have they ever failed?" Mother Agatha's smile faded. "Only once. And Ashbrook Hollow buried 27 coffins that spring. All with no eyes." He stepped back, breath catching. "The orchard," she added. "That's where the ground thins, where the soil breathes. That's why the house looks out. Because the dark wants in." Isaac left shaken. The wind had shifted. The trees no longer rustled. They whispered. Back at the Whitemoor house, Eleanor sat alone in the attic, the blue flame steady, the window clear. She thought of the diary, of Abigail's words, of Isaac and his endless questions, of the glow in the orchard. She barely noticed the new mark on the windowsill until her fingertips brushed it, rough, burned into the wood. The same jagged spiral Agatha had drawn. She jerked her hand back. Her chest tightened. The room felt colder than it should. She looked outside. Nothing moved, but something had been there. Downstairs, Samuel sat in his study, reading a faded letter. When Eleanor entered, he didn't look up. "You touched the book," he said. "I had to know. You were supposed to wait. I've waited my whole life." He closed the letter carefully. "Then you saw the symbol." She nodded. "What does it mean?" "It means you've been marked," he said. "You're no longer just a watcher. Now the dark knows your name." Eleanor stood frozen. "And if I stop watching?" Samuel finally looked at her, and for the first time fear flickered in his eyes. "Then they'll come ask why." The storm arrived without warning. Not a clap of thunder, not a drop of rain, only wind. It came low and fierce, like breath through clenched teeth. It rattled the trees and sent the shutters clattering in their hinges. But the Whitemoor house stood firm, unmoved as it always had. Inside, Eleanor could not sit still. Her fingers traced the mark on the windowsill again and again. It hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened. The jagged spiral seemed almost alive now, as if the grain of the wood pulsed faintly beneath her skin. Her breath felt tight in her chest. That evening, Samuel didn't light the lantern. When Eleanor questioned him, he simply said, "The dark already knows." She should have protested, should have shouted. Instead, she climbed to the attic with nothing but the blue wick in her hand, unlit. The silence was deafening. Every tick of the clock below felt like a hammer against her ribs, and for the first time in her life she did not draw the curtains. She stood in the open, face to glass, watching the night without protection. Outside, the orchard was cloaked in mist. Not fog, not smoke. Something thicker, stranger. It didn't move like weather. It curled, it pressed, it waited. Eleanor stepped closer. The moon, pale and bruised, hung low behind the clouds. Its light was faint, sickly. The trees in the distance leaned unnaturally, their limbs arched like ribs. Beneath them the ground shifted, not visibly, but in feeling. She could sense it. A subtle quake beneath the earth, a breath, a heartbeat. She wanted to light the lantern, but her fingers wouldn't move. Then movement. From between the trees came a flicker of something wrong. It was not a figure, nor a shadow. It was absence. The air around it recoiled. The mist parted to let it pass. As it drew closer to the edge of the orchard, the glass in front of her began to tremble, and still she watched. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but understanding. She wasn't just watching for something, she was watching with something, and whatever it was, it now watched back. The figure stopped at the edge of the orchard. No eyes, no face, no form to speak of, but it turned to her. She felt it. Her name rang silent inside her skull. Eleanor. She blinked, and it was gone. The mist collapsed inward like lungs exhaling. The trees snapped upright. The wind died instantly, and in that unnatural calm, the lantern wick in her hand sparked on its own. A cold blue flame erupted from it, blinding. She dropped it with a cry. The fire didn't burn the floor, it simply hovered, cold, humming, before vanishing into smoke. Downstairs the house groaned. She ran. Samuel met her at the foot of the stairs, his face pale, hands shaking. "You left it unlit?" he asked. She nodded. "And you watched?" Another nod. He closed his eyes. "Then it has begun." Eleanor grabbed his arm. "What did I see?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the front door and locked it, twice, then turned off every light in the house except for one, the old oil lamp in the parlor, the one her mother used to keep lit during storms. "We must wait," he said. "For what?" "For the sound." She didn't ask which sound. Some part of her already knew. That night, Eleanor lay awake in her room, eyes fixed on the crack of moonlight through the curtain she hadn't fully drawn. The air was still, too still, and just before sleep finally overtook her, she heard it. A whisper, not outside, inside, calling her name. Morning came too quietly. Ashbrook Hollow had a rhythm to it, a subtle but reliable cadence, the chiming of the church bell at dawn. The soft hum of conversation at the bakery, children laughing near the well before lessons began. But that day there was only silence, thick, slow, heavy. Eleanor sensed it before she stepped outside. The air clung to her skin like wet cloth. The birds hadn't sung. The wind had not stirred. She looked toward the orchard, and for the first time, it looked back. At the edge of town, near the one-room schoolhouse, a boy named Thomas Bell had not returned home the night before. His mother, red-eyed and trembling, stood in the town square with her husband. Their voices cracked as they pleaded for help. Thomas was 8. He had left the school just before sunset to fetch something from the well. He never came back. A search party gathered. Men with lanterns and axes, women clinging to one another with silent prayers. No one said what they feared, no one spoke of the dark, but they all glanced up once toward the hill, toward the Whitemoor house. Eleanor stood at her bedroom window, watching them, watching how none of them dared say what they knew. Her throat felt tight. That whisper from the night before still echoed in her ears. Her name drawn out like a breath. She turned away from the window and found Samuel in the parlor, seated and silent, staring at nothing. "You knew this would happen," she said. He didn't respond. "Why now? Why him?" Samuel's voice was dry. "Because something was promised and now it's being collected." She stepped closer. "We could have warned them. No one would have listened. Isaac would." His jaw clenched at the name. "That man is a fuse. You don't feed fire what you hope to preserve." Eleanor's hands curled into fists. "He wants the truth. Then he'll be buried with it." Later that afternoon, Eleanor walked through town, head down, heart racing. She found Isaac near the edge of the woods, just beyond the church. He was kneeling, brushing away leaves from the ground, revealing an old carving in a stone slab. "They've forgotten it was here," he said. "The old boundary marker. See the sigil?" It was the same one from the windowsill, the same from Abigail's diary, the spiral, the box, the lock. Eleanor stared at it, hollow. "Thomas Bell is missing," she whispered. Isaac froze. "When?" "Last night." He stood slowly. "You saw something, didn't you?" She didn't answer. "You need to tell me." "I can't. It's not just fear. It's law, blood law." Isaac looked past her, toward the orchard. "I don't think they'll stop with Thomas." They didn't. That evening, as the sky bled into twilight, the town was different, tighter, older. Like something had rolled back the years, the lanterns stayed dark longer. The doors locked sooner. No one lingered. And when Eleanor passed through the market square, eyes followed her. Murmurs, half heard. "They keep watching, but the boy's still gone. Maybe they failed. Maybe they let it happen." The words slithered under her skin like cold fingers. That night the attic felt smaller, the window closer. The flame from the lantern refused to light at first. It flickered like a match under water, uncertain. She watched, and far out, where the orchard met the tree line, something was waiting, not moving, not calling, just there, watching back. When she descended the stairs, Samuel wasn't at the bottom. She found him in the cellar, standing before the old furnace. "What are you doing?" she asked. He didn't look at her. "The town will turn soon. When they do, remember this. We're not the monsters." "Then who is?" He turned to her at last, and his eyes held something she'd never seen before, not fear, not anger, grief. "You'll know," he said, "when they come for you next." The house groaned more than usual that night, not from wind or settling beams, but from something deeper, something buried. Eleanor couldn't sleep, not after Samuel's words, not after the way his eyes had looked. She wandered the halls with a candle in hand, passing portraits whose eyes seemed to track her steps. The flame wavered as she reached the study. She paused. A draft whispered from the floorboards beneath the desk. She knelt. A corner of the rug had curled, revealing a hairline crack in the wood. She pulled it back completely, revealing a trapdoor she'd never seen before. No handle, just a smooth circular indentation in the center. Her fingers found a groove. She pressed. It clicked. The door opened with a slow, breathy sigh. A narrow stairwell descended into black. She went. The air changed, colder, damp, touched with iron. Her candle guttered but held. The stone walls wept with condensation, and at the bottom she found the chamber. It was small, uneven, more earthen than carved. Shelves lined the far wall, filled with books too old to survive this long, yet somehow intact. In the center, a wooden table, and on it, a map. Yellowed, brittle, marked with circles and inked warnings. She stepped closer. The map was of Ashbrook Hollow, but not as it was now, as it had once been. Different borders, no schoolhouse, no chapel, just names of properties long forgotten. And in red, marked with a symbol she now recognized too well, were dozens of points. Most were crossed out. All but one, the Whitemoor estate. She turned to the shelves. Journals, diaries, names dating back to the 1800s, all Whitemoors. She opened one at random. August 12th, 1872. The soil won't hold them much longer. The pact weakens with every child, lost to forgetfulness. We anchor the boundary, but it grows restless. Another, March 2nd, 1901. The watchers come closer now. The orchard hums at night. It speaks without sound. We dare not answer. Then she saw them, bones, stacked neatly in the far corner. Human, child-sized. No coffins, no markers. Just rows of remains wrapped in old linen, jawbones clenched tight, fingers curled inward. Eleanor stepped back, bile rising in her throat. They weren't buried, they were kept. The realization struck like lightning. These were not offerings. They were evidence. A diary near the bones lay open. Its ink was fresher than the others. We didn't save them. We contained them. The ones taken had already been marked. We kept their presence from spreading. We sealed the memory. We watched so others wouldn't look beneath. Eleanor stumbled from the room, heart racing, breath shallow. She climbed the stairs two at a time, burst into the parlor, and collapsed into the chair where her mother used to knit. Samuel was waiting. "You found it," he said quietly. She didn't speak. Couldn't. "There are truths that protect," he continued, "and truths that destroy. You weren't supposed to go down there alone." "They were children," she gasped. "Yes. You knew." "I remembered." "That's different." She stood, voice shaking. "This isn't a pact, it's a prison." He didn't argue, just nodded once. "And we are its wardens." Outside, the wind had returned, low, subtle, like a hand brushing the edge of a veil. Eleanor walked to the window and looked toward the orchard. The mist had come back, thicker now, but it didn't move. It waited. On the glass, a faint shape began to appear from the inside. A spiral, drawn in fog. Her fingers trembled. She wiped it away, and the spiral redrew itself, not from within, from outside. Isaac returned at dusk. No train brought him. No one saw him on the road. But there he stood, at the gate of the Whitemoor orchard, as if he'd stepped out from between the trees. His coat was dusted with leaves, his eyes darker than before. He looked thinner, paler, but more certain, like a man who had crossed a threshold and chosen not to turn back. Eleanor spotted him from the attic window and rushed down, lantern in hand, her pulse a storm in her chest. "You left," she said breathlessly. "I had to," he replied. "But I found more than I planned to." They met at the edge of the orchard, just beyond the gate. The mist parted around him. It didn't touch him, as if it knew. Isaac reached into his satchel and produced a folder of brittle pages, photographs and maps. "I've been to the other towns, the ones whispered about, Sleepy Hollow, Harrow's Reach, Blackwater." Eleanor recognized the names. They'd appeared in Abigail's journal, circled in red ink, places where the watchers once lingered. "They all had families like yours," Isaac said, "each assigned to a place where the ground grew thin. But most lines were broken. People forgot, or chose not to remember." "And the watchers?" Eleanor asked. He looked out over the orchard. "They moved, slowly, spread, until something rooted them again." "Us," Isaac nodded. "Your family is the last stable anchor, and they hate you for it. A quiet settled between them, the kind that tastes like snow and waiting. "You've seen them," he said at last. "Yes. And?" "They don't want us dead. They want us silent." Isaac stepped closer. "What if we spoke?" Eleanor hesitated. "The town already blames us, because they don't understand." She shook her head. "They can't. Understanding is what invites them in." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Then teach me, not just the stories, the rules, the rituals. I want to help." Eleanor stared at him. Not just a stranger anymore, not just a man of questions, a man who had seen and returned. She led him inside. Samuel stood in the foyer, arms crossed, gaze like ice. "He shouldn't be here." "I invited him," Eleanor said. "This house is not a haven for trespassers." Isaac stepped forward. "I'm not here to trespass. I'm here to protect what's left." Samuel said nothing, but he didn't stop them when they passed. In the library by firelight, Eleanor unrolled the map from the hidden chamber. Isaac's eyes widened as he traced the old symbols. "They're converging," he whispered. "Everything leads here." Eleanor nodded. "We're the center now, the eye of the spiral." "And the town?" "Sleeping," she said, "but not safe." Isaac looked up. "Then we don't have time." They spent the night in the attic side by side. Eleanor taught him the chants passed down from Abigail's line. How to light the lantern without fire, how to trace the runes in ash, how to look without being seen. As dawn approached, the window shimmered faintly, not from condensation, but pressure. The watchers had noticed the shift, a second presence, a second name. "They know I'm here," Isaac whispered. Eleanor touched the window glass. "Then they'll test you." Downstairs, Samuel lit the furnace. The house shuddered slightly. Eleanor knew what that meant. The soil beneath was shifting again, the watchers were moving closer. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. As the sun broke the horizon, Isaac stepped away from the window. "What happens next?" Eleanor looked at the blue lantern still burning from the night before. "They wait for a mistake," she said. "And we don't give them one." Samuel hadn't spoken all morning. He moved through the house like a man walking through memories, careful, reverent, exhausted. The floorboards creaked beneath him, not from age, but from weight. Eleanor watched him from the threshold of the study, unsure whether to follow, unsure if she wanted to hear what he might finally be ready to say. But he spoke first. "I was 12 when my father stopped watching." She stepped inside quietly. "Why?" "He wanted to test the truth. Said if the watchers were real, they'd make themselves known. If they weren't, we were slaves to myth." Samuel's eyes stayed on the cold hearth. "That night our neighbor's barn burned. His youngest was found curled against the ash, eyes wide, empty. My father said it was coincidence, but he never looked again." "What did you do?" "I watched, alone, for years, until he died, and then it was mine." Eleanor sat across from him. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He glanced up, something brittle in his expression. "Because I hoped you'd never feel it, the pull. The watching that becomes being watched. I already do." Samuel nodded slowly, like he'd always known that moment would come. He opened a drawer in the desk and withdrew a sealed envelope. The paper was yellowed, the wax cracked. "From your mother," he said. Eleanor hesitated before opening it. The handwriting was soft, slanted, familiar. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then the watchers have turned toward you. I am sorry. I fought to break the cycle. I thought love might be enough, but the soil does not care for love, only balance. You are not a curse. You are the anchor, the last thread. Don't let it unravel." Eleanor folded the letter with trembling hands. "She knew," she whispered. "She always did," Samuel replied. "She watched with me when you were a baby. She kept the flame, she marked the orchard. But after the last incident, the girl from the schoolhouse?" He closed his eyes. "Yes. After that, she broke. She said she wouldn't raise you in a house full of ghosts. But she stayed." "She stayed," he echoed. Because she loved you more than she feared them. Outside, the mist thickened. Isaac entered without knocking. His face was pale, his hands trembling around a torn sheet of paper. Another one's missing. Samuel stood. Who? Sarah Hale, 12. Left her home before dawn. They found her boots at the edge of the orchard. Eleanor's throat tightened. They're accelerating. They're retaliating, Isaac said. Samuel looked to the window. No. They're warning. Warning what? Isaac snapped. That our line isn't enough anymore. The pact was meant for a world that believed in fear. This town doesn't remember, so it no longer holds. Eleanor stepped forward. Then we remind them. Isaac met her eyes. How? We speak. We show them what we see. We light every window. We watch together. Samuel shook his head. They won't believe. They never do. And when you force belief, something worse wakes. Eleanor touched his hand. Then we choose. Watch alone and fall slowly, or stand together and risk it all. He looked at her, long and hard, then finally said, I watched because they spared us once. Why? Isaac asked. Samuel hesitated. Because I asked them to. The silence fell like stone. You spoke to them, Eleanor whispered. In 1931, I was a boy. They came in the orchard. I begged, I cried, I offered everything. They gave me a task instead. And that task was? Isaac pressed. Samuel's voice was barely audible. To look, always look, and to pass it on, without fail. He turned to Eleanor, eyes glassy. And now it's yours. The sun disappeared at noon. The sky didn't darken gradually. It collapsed. A smothering shadow swept over Ashbrook Hollow like a curtain torn from the heavens. Birds fell silent mid-flight. Dogs whimpered and crawled under porches. Clocks stopped, without reason, without mercy. An eclipse had not been forecast. No one expected it. And yet it came. Eleanor stood in the attic, lantern already lit, the blue flame burning furiously despite the hour. Isaac paced beside her, muttering prayers he didn't believe. Samuel was gone, vanished before dawn. No note, no sound, only his coat on the hook and the cellar door ajar. The orchard breathed. That was the only way to describe it. The mist heaved like lungs drawing in centuries of silence. Trees bent backward as if retreating from something rising beneath them. Then the watchers came. They didn't walk. They unfolded from the air, tall as rooftops, thin as memory, faceless, boneless, yet undeniable. Their presence cracked the ground and warped the sky. They reached toward the town with arms like smoke, and no one saw them, because no one looked, except the Whitemoor house. Eleanor held the lantern high. The flame hissed, resisting. Isaac gripped the window frame. They're not stopping. They're not meant to, she said. The watchers reached the first house, the bakery. Its windows shattered outward in silence. A scream rose, cut short, swallowed by the thickening dark. Next came the chapel. The bell tolled once, then never again. Eleanor's voice trembled. We need more light. Isaac raced down the stairs, emerging moments later with every lamp, candle, and torch they had. He lit them all. Flames flickered and rose, but the watchers pressed on. It's not enough, he whispered. They're everywhere now. The air turned cold. Not winter cold, wrong cold. Time slowed. The blue flame dimmed. Eleanor stumbled. Her breath left her in clouds. The spiral reappeared on the window, burning through the frost. But this time it wasn't a warning. It was a call. And something answered. A shape rose from the orchard, larger than the others, old beyond language. It had no edges, no center, only intention. It turned toward the house, toward Eleanor. Run, she said. Isaac didn't move. Run, she screamed. Get to the church if it's still standing. Tell them to look, make them see. But I'm marked, I have to stay. He hesitated, then nodded once, and vanished into the stairwell. The watchers turned toward him as he fled, but they did not follow. Their focus remained fixed, on her. Eleanor stepped to the window. She opened it wide. The wind hit her like a wall. She raised the lantern above her head, chanting the old words, the same ones from Abigail's diary. The words no one remembered, but the watchers did. The orchard pulsed. The mist recoiled. The great shape halted. "Eleanor," it whispered, not with voice, but with the cracking of every beam in the house. She stood firm. "I am the anchor," she said louder. "I am the flame. I am the eye." The watchers began to withdraw slowly, like smoke drawn back into a pipe. But the Great One remained. It leaned forward. The spiral on the window flared. Her body tensed. Then, from below, Samuel's voice. "Don't break." He stood in the orchard now, arms outstretched, holding a mirror against the sky. Its surface warped, cracked, glowed. The Great One paused. Eleanor shouted the final phrase from the chant. The blue flame erupted, swallowing the attic in cold light, and the sky shattered. The eclipse broke. Light returned, and the orchard fell silent. Eleanor collapsed to her knees, the lantern extinguished in her hand. But she was still alive, and the watchers were gone. For now. The light didn't last. Though the eclipse passed and the sky cleared, a strange dusk lingered over Ashbrook Hollow. Shadows clung to corners longer than they should. The wind moved without touching leaves, and beneath the soil the watchers waited. Not defeated, only delayed. Eleanor lay on the attic floor, breath shallow, limbs trembling. Her body felt hollowed out, as if the chant had drained more than her voice. The lantern beside her was cracked, its blue glass fractured but intact. The spiral on the window had faded, but a faint imprint remained, as if burned into the glass from within. Footsteps approached. Isaac. His shirt was torn, a cut on his temple, but he was breathing. "They stopped," he said. "For now," she whispered. He helped her sit. "Samuel?" She shook her head. "He was in the orchard. He gave me time." They both knew what that meant. They found him at the edge of the trees, lying on the frost-touched grass. His face was calm, peaceful, eyes closed, arms folded across his chest. In his hand was the mirror, shattered, bloodied, but still reflecting the sky. Eleanor knelt beside him. He held them back. Isaac crouched beside her. "He gave us a chance." Back at the house, silence reclaimed the halls. Clocks had stopped. The blue flame refused to reignite. The attic felt colder, hollower, as if something sacred had passed on. Eleanor stood before the window again. The horizon was different now, not just darker, thinner. The world had shifted. The line between above and below had blurred. "They'll come again," Isaac said. "You know that?" "Yes. We can't hold them like this every time." "No." He turned to her. "Then what do we do?" She looked down at the lantern in her hands, then out toward the orchard. "We finish it." Isaac frowned. "How?" "By becoming what they fear." That night she stood alone in the attic one final time. No lantern, no curtain, just her. She watched without ritual, without chant, without fear. And from the trees the watchers emerged once more, but slower now, cautious, as if testing her. She didn't move. They came close, but did not touch the house. The Great One returned, towering above the orchard like a storm cloud made flesh. It stared without eyes. Eleanor stepped to the open window. Her voice was steady. "You know me." The watchers shifted. "I see you." They hissed without breath. "I remember." And in that moment they stopped, not in defeat, in recognition. She held her ground as they began to recede, not vanished, not destroyed, but bound. The pact reborn, not in silence or obedience, but in will. She had chosen to watch, not out of duty, but defiance. The watchers melted into the trees, into the soil, into the breath of the earth. When Isaac entered the attic, Eleanor was alone, standing in the moonlight. They left. "They'll come again," she said, "but they'll fear you next time." She turned to him. "They already do." Together, they descended into the heart of the house. The cracked map was spread on the table once more. Eleanor traced a line from Ashbrook Hollow to a name long faded. "There are others," she said. Isaac nodded. "I'll find them, and I'll teach them how to look." They sat in silence. Outside, the night returned to stillness. No wind, no whisper, only peace. But deep beneath the orchard, something stirred. Not hungry, not angry, only watching. Because now someone else was watching back. Ashbrook Hollow did what towns like it always did. It forgot. The eclipse was blamed on an atmospheric anomaly. The missing children were mourned, then buried quietly, their graves unmarked. No one spoke of the shadows that moved without shape. No one questioned the screams that had torn through the night. No one knocked on the Whitemoor door. They never did, ever. By the end of the week, the town returned to its rituals. Market days, church bells, lullabies sung too softly. Windows were shuttered earlier than before, but no one said why. The people didn't remember the watchers, but they acted like they did. The mayor issued a statement calling for unity and caution, citing unseasonal unrest and the psychological toll of a darkened sky. The newspaper printed only one article, buried on the 4th page, titled "Strange Weather Strikes Hollow. Experts Shrug." It made no mention of the fires or the screams or the Whitemoors. Eleanor watched from the hilltop window as life limped forward. She no longer felt like part of it. The distance was not in miles but in knowing. She had crossed a threshold no one else dared approach. She was no longer simply a girl in a house full of clocks. She was the memory. At night, she lit the lantern again. Not out of necessity, but defiance. No spiral appeared on the glass. No watchers whispered. But still, she stood at the window, waiting. Below, the children played as if nothing had ever been wrong. Except for one thing. Their games had changed. They no longer played hide-and-seek. Now, they played Watcher. One would stand at the edge of the woods, eyes wide, arms out. The others would sit with their backs turned. If they heard a whisper, they'd spin around. If they saw movement, they'd freeze. And if the Watcher moved, they screamed. Eleanor listened to the rules from her attic perch. No one knew where the game had come from. No one taught it. But the children played with strange precision, like something whispered it into their ears at night. One afternoon, she heard them chanting a rhyme. "Watch the woods when the sun goes down. Close your eyes or leave this town. Don't look once and don't look twice, or meet the ones who don't play nice." The adults ignored it. Eleanor did not. She kept a journal now, not for herself, but for whoever came after. Names, dates, dreams, every movement in the orchard recorded, every tremble in the flame, every thought she wasn't ready to speak aloud. Isaac helped. He catalogued everything. The town's history, the sigils, the chants. He sent letters to scholars under false names. Most never replied. The few that did dismissed his findings as local superstition. But the house knew the truth. It creaked differently now, not in fear but vigilance. The walls had absorbed the chants. The stairs knew her rhythm. The attic no longer felt like a cage but a tower. A beacon, a promise. Eleanor had not cried since Samuel died, but sometimes she sat by the cold furnace with his coat folded in her lap, and she felt the grief move through her, quiet, constant, like the watchers beneath the soil. She missed him, but she understood him now. Ashbrook Hollow would forget again. In a year, a decade, a generation. The people would return to their distractions, their routines, their curated ignorance. But the watchers wouldn't. And neither would she. So she kept the light burning. Not because she had to, because she chose to. Because the town's memory was fragile, but her gaze was not. And if anyone ever dared to ask what really happened the night the sky turned black, what really came out of the orchard, Eleanor would be waiting. Not with warnings, but with truth. The attic became a place of ink and silence. Eleanor no longer kept vigil merely with her eyes. Her hands moved across paper now, old thick parchment pulled from forgotten drawers. Her handwriting, once tentative, had grown sharp, deliberate. She chronicled everything, what she'd seen, what she'd felt, what she feared. She called it the Record of the Flame. Each entry began the same way. The night is not empty. She wrote for those who would come after. Not just family, if there ever would be any, but anyone who might find their way to the Whitemoor window, lantern in hand, spine trembling with the weight of unspoken memory. Isaac helped her organize the archive. He'd cleared a corner of the attic, shelves rising around them, filled with journals, sketches, letters, a history that had lived too long in whispers. They wrote with urgency, not because the watchers had returned, but because they would, one day. They both knew it. The townsfolk kept their distance. Rumors still clung to the Whitemoor name, but no one dared speak them aloud. Eleanor and Isaac became fixtures, ghosts among the living, observed but never questioned, until the letter arrived. It came from Boston, a scholar, a real one. He'd read Isaac's submission in a fringe journal and found the language disturbingly familiar. He claimed to have studied similar phenomena in villages across Europe, remote places with curfews, with symbols carved in doorways, with families who watched. The man wanted to visit, to see the orchard, to look. Eleanor refused. Isaac disagreed. He might help us spread the truth, he said. Might help us prepare. She stared at the spiral on the attic glass, faded now but always there in the right light. Truth isn't what binds them, she said. Memory is. You're afraid of what he'll bring? I'm afraid of what he'll wake. The scholar never came. A letter arrived weeks later saying he'd fallen ill. Then silence. One night, Eleanor found herself alone. Isaac had gone to the chapel to retrieve old records. She sat by the attic window, candle burning low, quill resting in the ink jar. A knock echoed up from below. Not the door, the cellar. She froze. The furnace hadn't lit in days. The air had grown colder, subtly, like breath turning stale. She took a lantern but didn't light it. Instead, she descended in darkness. The cellar was empty. But the mirror was gone. The one Samuel had held, the one that had shattered the sky. In its place was a folded note, written in Eleanor's mother's hand. The pact is not sealed with silence, but with memory. Forget, and they return. Remember, and they wait. Eleanor stood there a long time. That night, she added a final section to the archive, for those who dream of the orchard. It read, "You are not the first. You will not be the last. If you hear whispers before sleep, if you see the spiral in frost, if your child speaks of eyes without faces, do not look away. Stand, watch, write. The watchers do not hate you. They fear you forgetting." Isaac returned just before dawn. He found her asleep in the attic, pen still in hand, candle burned to wax. He didn't wake her. He simply added a page beside hers. "We don't keep the truth, we carry it." Outside, the orchard stood silent. The mist had thinned, but the soil pulsed faintly beneath the roots. The watchers were not gone, only patient, only bound. By letters, by eyes, by those willing to remember what others begged to forget. Years passed. The orchard grew thicker, the trees more gnarled, their trunks bearing strange ridges like runes pressed into bark. The mist returned every autumn, lingering longer with each year, but never crossing the fence line. Eleanor aged slowly, her hair silvered, her steps softened, but her eyes remained sharp, always watching, always remembering. Isaac stayed beside her, first as a partner, then as a caretaker. Their bond grew not from romance, but from something older, deeper, a covenant forged in silence and sealed in shared knowing. The attic changed little. The lantern still sat on the sill, its glass now clear again. The spiral faded, but never gone. Shelves lined the walls, holding decades of records, sketches, and letters from faraway places. Others had written back. Some had come. Most never stayed. But a few watched. The town shifted. Children became parents. Parents grew old. Houses were rebuilt. Roads paved. But no matter how the world changed, the people of Ashbrook Hollow drew their curtains at dusk. And they taught their children to do the same. One winter, Isaac passed. Eleanor found him on the porch, eyes closed, his last journal still open in his lap. She buried him behind the house, near the edge of the orchard, just beyond the reach of the roots. She did not weep. she whispered. "Thank you for seeing." She watched alone for 3 more years, until one spring morning, she didn't wake. The townsfolk expected the house to go dark, but that night a light still burned in the attic window. Someone else had taken her place. A girl, no older than 7. She stood with hands on the glass, posture rigid, eyes wide open. She did not blink. She did not move. No one knew her name. No one had seen her arrive. And yet, there she was. At first, the town whispered of ghosts, of curses, of orphans drawn to the old blood. But when no one died, when no new shadows crept across porches, they stopped asking. They simply accepted. The watchers remained quiet, and the light never went out. In time, children began to chant a new verse. If you see the window bright, someone's there to keep the night. Don't ask how and don't ask why. Some just watch so we don't die. One day, a traveler stopped by the inn at the edge of town. He'd heard rumors. He'd seen the flickering light. He walked to the hill and stood at the gate, peering up at the Whitemoor house. He saw the girl, and for a moment, the girl saw him. She raised her hand, not in greeting, in warning. The traveler turned back. Years later, the girl wrote her first letter. It began, "My name is not Whitemoor, but the house chose me. The flame does not care for names, only eyes that do not close." She addressed it to no one, but someone would find it. Someone always did, because the truth never sleeps, and the watchers never stop waiting. Even now, if you pass through Ashbrook Hollow and the mist is thick enough, you might see the attic window burning blue. You might feel the hairs on your arms rise. You might feel watched, but don't be afraid. It means the pact still holds, that someone still remembers. And if this story stayed with you, if it lit something in you that refuses to dim, subscribe now so you never miss what others try to forget. Because in the shadows of the world, truth waits quietly, and the next flame might be yours. Click the video on screen to uncover the secret beneath the Hollow's sister town.